From the Forbidden Case Files of Old New England, The Shadow Farm, Chapter 4. Lance walked westward, the night enveloping him in darkness, the slivered moon playing a game of peekaboo with him as it slid behind clouds to remain hidden for a stretch of time, to appear again for a quick minute before again hiding itself in the nebulous night sky. Just when Lance was beginning to think he'd walk off the road and into a field, never to find his way back, he saw a headlight in the distance. It grew brighter as it approached, revealing an old battered truck with the words "Gibson's Produce" painted on the sideboards. The truck rumbled to a stop beside him, and the window rolled down to reveal a young man with a wide grin and a rustic, farm boy appearance. "You look lost, mister," the young man said, his voice friendly. Lance explained that he was heading to Liston, and the young man offered him a ride. "I'm Michael," the young man introduced himself as Lance climbed into the cab. "I was on my way back from dropping off produce in Indianapolis. I'm in a bit of trouble, though. I was supposed to have the truck back to Old Man Gibson before sundown, but I figure it can't be helped now. May as well do a good turn for a stranger. May even improve my luck and give me a good excuse to give the old man when I get his truck back to him." As they drove, Mike asked Lance what business he had in Liston. Lance explained that he was interested in the farm located on County Road 75, the old Hendrickson place. At this, Mike slammed on the brakes, nearly sending Lance through the windshield. "Are you crazy?" Mike exclaimed, his voice rising in alarm. "That place is sour and cursed. No one goes there, no one who wants to keep themselves 6 feet above ground." Lance readjusted himself in his seat, his heart still pounding from the sudden stop. He told Mike about his friend Frank, who had been looking for an heir to the farm since Jacob Hendrickson had passed away. Frank might have gone out to the farm, and now he was missing. Mike continued driving, but the cheerful banter from before had vanished. The rest of the ride was spent in uneasy silence. Eventually, the truck came to a stop at a small gas station just off the main road. The pumps stood like sentinels in the darkness, and the only light came from a single bulb hanging over the station's entrance. "This is about as far as I can get you," Mike said, his voice somber. "The property's half a mile down the road. Go east at the crossroads, then south at the next. That's County Road 75, and it dead ends at the farm. But, mister, I highly recommend you wait until light to go. No one has any business there, light or otherwise. Heck, they were going to auction it off, but the auctioneer went out to that farm and never came back to town to set up the sale." Lance leaned forward. An auctioneer? This was the first Lance had heard the property was going to be auctioned. It added to the confusing tangle of facts. Why did Frank get put on the case to find an heir if the property was going up for auction? Mike knew little more about the auction, just that the auctioneer was a city guy whom no one had done business with before. He didn't seem interested in advertising the auction, not like any of the locals would attend more or less make a bid on the property. It was cursed and all the townsfolk knew it. Nothing would grow in its fields, and over the years too many disappearances, from animals and children to door-to-door salesmen, all seemed to lead right up to the front door of that old farmhouse. Lance thanked Mike for the ride and climbed out of the truck. The night was cold and still, the darkness pressing in around him. Mike drove off, the sound of the truck's engine fading into the distance, leaving Lance alone at the edge of the road. The only thing that broke the silence was the rustle of leaves in the wind and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Lighting a cigarette, Lance took a deep drag, trying to draw some comfort from the ember. The road to the farm lay before him, a narrow, dusty path that disappeared into the night. He could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him, the same weight that had haunted him since he'd received Frank's letter. But there was no turning back now. With a final glance at the gas station, Lance began walking down the road, his footsteps crunching on the gravel. The crossroads loomed ahead, shrouded in darkness, and beyond that, the farm waited, an old, cursed place where shadows moved and secrets lay buried. As he walked, the wind picked up, whispering through the trees, carrying with it the faint scent of something decayed and rotten. Lance shivered, pulling his coat tighter around him. The road stretched on, the darkness growing deeper with every step. The cigarette burned down to the filter, and Lance flicked it away, watching the tiny spark vanish into the night. The farm was close now. He could feel it. The shadows were waiting, and soon he would be among them. Lance Hughes stood at the edge of the Hendrickson farm, his breath caught in his throat as he took in the scene before him. The farmhouse, once a proud symbol of rural stability, now sagged under the weight of years of neglect. Its roof was caved in, windows shattered, and the walls seemed to lean inward as if the structure was being consumed by the earth beneath it. The surrounding fields, once fertile and green, were now choked with weeds and overgrown brush. But it was the woods, encroaching upon the property like a malignant tumor, that held Lance's attention. The trees stood tall and oppressive, their gnarled branches twisting in unnatural shapes, casting long claw-like shadows over the farm. The woods exuded a palpable sense of malice, a dread that seemed to seep from the very soil and taint the air with the stench of rot and decay. But the most striking feature of the farm was the barn. It loomed at the edge of the woods like a sentinel, its red paint mostly peeled away to reveal the weathered grey wood beneath. The roof had collapsed in places, and one of the massive barn doors hung precariously from a single hinge, creaking softly in the wind. The structure seemed to pulse with an unseen energy, something both ancient and malevolent, as though the very timbers of the barn were imbued with a dark and terrible secret. As much as the barn called out to him, Lance felt an equal amount of revulsion at the thought of entering it. Instead, he made his way up the path to the collapsing farmhouse. As he stood on the creaking porch of the collapsing farmhouse, his mind wrestled with conflicting instincts. Part of him wanted to turn back, to leave this cursed place behind, but the thought of Frank kept him anchored to the decayed boards beneath his feet. Scattered about the front porch were dozens of dead squirrels. The squirrels, lifeless and stiff, lay scattered across the porch like a bizarre offering. Their eyes were gone, and their bodies had withered under the weight of time. Some had decomposed almost to the bone, others seemed oddly preserved, as if something unnatural had slowed their decay. Lance knelt briefly, gloved hand hovering over the creatures. There was something unsettling about their condition, too much uniformity in their deaths, as if they had fallen victim to the same curse that now gripped the house. He straightened, pushing open the door which groaned on its rusted hinges. Inside, the stale air carried a mouldy, suffocating stench, mingled with the acrid scent of something long burnt. The wallpaper, once floral and cheery, sagged in heavy strips from the walls, revealing patches of blackened wood beneath. The floor creaked ominously under Lance's weight, swollen with moisture from years of neglect, and he could see where it had buckled in places, creating strange, uneven angles in the floorboards. Every step felt like it might plunge him through to the rotting foundations. He took a moment to let his eyes adjust to the dim light filtering through the shattered windows. The furniture was little more than ruins now. Chairs had collapsed inward, cushions were torn open, their stuffing spilling out like the viscera of gutted animals. A once grand armchair in the corner was now a skeletal frame of rusted springs, pointing up toward the ceiling like grasping fingers. Above the fireplace, Lance noticed the heavy gilt frame of a painting, the canvas within it curled and drooping. He hesitated before approaching it. Something about the frame's dull glimmer caught his eye, as if it retained a sinister life of its own. Carefully, he rolled the painting back into place. The face that stared back at him from the portrait was weathered and stern. Orville Hendrickson, no doubt, from the name etched on the bottom of the portrait. Lance recognized the sharp lines of his jaw, the hollowed cheeks, the fierce gaze under thick brows. What sent a shiver down Lance's spine, though, was the uncanny resemblance to Jacob Hendrickson, the farm's last known owner. The likeness was almost perfect, a reflection in time. Orville's eyes, though painted, seemed to follow Lance with an accusatory glare. He imagined for a moment that they knew why he was here, knew what he was looking for, or rather, who he was hoping to find. Rolling the canvas back down with a shudder, Lance turned his attention to the coal bucket beside the fireplace. His eyes narrowed. The bucket was full, not with coal, but with burnt remains of wallets and purses. Some were barely singed, others charred beyond recognition, but all shared one detail: no identification. Lance lifted a scorched leather wallet from the top of the pile. It was of fine quality, the kind owned by men of wealth. Strange, considering the dilapidated state of the farmhouse. One by one he examined the items. Fine leather bags, worn velvet coin purses, elegant silk billfolds, none of which belonged in a place like this. There had to be at least 15 of them. No identification, no clue as to the owners, just lifeless relics of forgotten people, remnants of lives that had passed through this cursed place. His mind raced. What were these items doing here? Why burn them, but not fully destroy them? Were they trophies of some twisted act? The weight of his suspicions settled heavier on his shoulders. Frank had been onto something when he came here, something that had likely gotten him killed. Lance moved carefully through the rest of the house, his footsteps echoing eerily in the emptiness. A small desk, its drawers swollen shut from water damage, caught his eye. After a few futile tugs, he managed to pry one open, revealing a stack of yellowed letters and envelopes, all bearing the stamp of the Traskin Real Estate Company. Lance's brow furrowed as he scanned the contents. The earlier letters were polite, even enthusiastic, addressed to Jakob Hendrickson, offering generous sums to purchase the farm, sums far exceeding the property's actual worth. But the tone of the later letters shifted. The offers dropped sharply, and the language became colder, more insistent. The last two letters, dated only a month ago, were especially grim. One letter warned that a Traskin representative would be arriving soon to ascertain the legal ownership of the farm. The other stated that, barring any claimants, the county had approved the auction of the property. Though it was a mere formality, the Traskin company had already secured their bid. It was clear they wanted the farm, and they wanted it soon. As Lance gathered the letters, an unsettling thought gnawed at him. Frank had come here to find an heir, to trace Jakob Hendrickson's bloodline, but Traskin had no interest in that. They were merely waiting for the legal red tape to clear so they could seize the property for a fraction of its value. Frank's investigation had likely interfered with their plans, and now Frank was missing, or worse. His pulse quickened as he pieced it together. This was more than a simple real estate dispute. There was something deeper, darker at play. The burnt wallets, the unsent letters, the strange resemblance between Orville and Jakob. It all hinted at a sinister past that stretched beyond mere greed. Clutching the letters, Lance stepped out of the house and back onto the porch. The dead squirrels greeted him again, their lifeless eyes fixed on the ruin behind him. He looked out across the overgrown fields, feeling the weight of unseen eyes upon him, as if the land itself was watching, waiting for him to make his next move. He didn't know what he was walking into, but one thing was clear. Whatever had taken Frank was still here, lurking in the shadows, waiting for its next victim. Continued in Chapter 5 of The Shadow Farm.